Well, Joel Katz, you're Managing Director of CLIA, Cruise Lines International Association in Australia. And what a challenging job at this point in time with so much happening. But how are you surviving?
It's certainly a busy time and never a dull moment.
Yeah, but the pleasant thing is you're able to sit on a cruise ship there with the sunset behind you, you know, no doubt you've got a pina colada in hand. It's a bit like the tourism industry, you see, in general. I think everybody thinks that we're all just, you know, having a wonderful time, eating lots of food and drinking drinks because we're in the fun business. And I'm convinced that's what governments think. So they think about you in the cruise business that you're always on a ship drinking pina coladas. So you can't win, can you?
No, well, look, we're all in unprecedented times. You know, cruise is not unique. The whole travel and tourism sector is really struggling. We are, you know, our role is to keep pushing forward and to do everything we can to support the resumption of cruise, which ultimately then, you know, benefits our members, but also benefits the travel agents. And all those, you know, tens of thousands of suppliers across Australia and New Zealand who support the cruise industry or support and who are supported by the cruise industry.
Yeah, I don't think people realise that, and I know P&O's done quite a bit of work on that recently, and a couple of videos and stuff with Thermomel and so on out in farms, because farmers that normally supply P&O, how affected they've been, and then the Ponant scenario in New Zealand, how, you know, it's not a big ship, but they were all set up, you know, in New Zealand to supply this ship, and all of a sudden the New Zealand government, well, in fact, no, the New Zealand government, as you know, gave them approval, and then the Minister for Immigration decided to do something else, okay, which is pretty dramatic and pretty awful for Ponant. But it does sort of exemplify a bit that, you know, the lack of understanding, I suppose. But it's some time since we've had a chat, okay? And I know you've been very hard at work in the background. And I know I've been speaking to a number of your colleagues in the cruise industry, and they're very complimentary of the work the CLIA has been doing in these very difficult times. But over the last 24 hours or so, then the government has announced a further ban on international travel. Now, I've got this funny feeling that Alwyn-Jones is going into a career in politics afterwards, okay? Because he's now negotiating with the premiers in each state about border closures, and he's also seems to have taken over the role of saying when international travel will start again, at least from airline perspective, in October. Whereas, just diverting to airlines for a second, a bucket load of other airlines like Qatar, Emirates, Etihad, Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific are all flying into Australia quite happily at the moment, but they can't carry lots of people because of the ban on quarantines. So that's my little aside for the day. But let's get back to cruising. Further 3-month extension, from my perspective, not unexpected, I don't think. There's the reality check that we all have to have, okay? And there was no way this government was going to change anything. But enough from me. Give me your perspective on it.
Look, nobody was expecting that the ban was going to be completely lifted on the 17th of March, and it's certainly going to be a long and staged process to get back to normal. We know that the biosecurity emergency determination, which is what is also keeping Australians from travelling, what's keeping our borders closed, and which then also is stopping these ships from returning to Australia, is what effectively has put Australia in such a strong position. So you absolutely have to respect the government's position on that. But at the same time, we've been making some good progress in our discussions with the government around what a carefully managed, phased, staged resumption would look like. And I suppose we were hoping that we would have reached the point by this renewal that we'd reach some, I suppose you could say, finalization of that framework, so that could then be built into the renewal. Unfortunately, we haven't, which is to some extent disappointing, but at the same time, very reassuring that the minister in his announcement reiterated that the determination can be amended or adjusted at any time, and then also reiterated that there is engagement with the states, with the cruise industry, on what a carefully staged resumption of cruise can look like.
Yeah, look, I think it's great news, to be honest with you. As I said before, I didn't anticipate that it was going to be released. It would have been a miracle if it had been. And I'm not sure it would have been a good thing quite yet, because One of the issues about the protocols is having absolutely watertight protocols, because the last thing we want to happen going forward is for something to happen. Okay, because that would be disastrous. For a cruise ship to start operating from Australia and perish the thought something happened in relation to COVID, we'd be back to the start point. And I think there's a silver cloud to every lining here, because I think all of a sudden the government, and I can imagine when you first started discussion with both the states and the federal government, and also when you think about watching the Ruby Princess inquiry in Sydney, there was a lack of understanding of exactly how complex cruising was. They just thought it was a couple of ships. It's dead easy. You've got a few people on board that serve you the pina coladas, and that's about it. But they've now begun to understand how complex it is and how beneficial cruising is to the country. And I think that's been a big step forward. And so, as I say, if there's a silver cloud or a silver lining to each cloud, that is one of them. But let's imagine now, I've been looking at the P&O programs and Royal Caribbean programs and stuff like that. And, they're looking at starting cruises sort of June, July, and nothing internationally until about the early part of next year. And that reflects this process when you think about it that way. But I tell you what's exciting as well is the number of small operators that are now operating in Australia. And I know Scenic had to pull back today because they sort of enthusiastically launched to travel agents that they were selling and all this sort of stuff, but they hadn't got the approval yet. I know Ponant hasn't got their approval yet. But from your perspective, is that an exciting move as well in terms of testing things?
Yes. So part of our staged, carefully managed resumption is really about being able to offer, as I said, local cruising for locals. So that's about being able to bring some ships in and operate local cruises, both intrastate and then expanding into interstate, and then across the Tasman, hopefully when we get a broader bubble, and of course into the South Pacific. But as you say, most of the larger ships have now suspended their operations through to the middle of the year.
Yeah.
And really the next, I suppose you could say, season that's coming upon us is the expedition season up in the northwest of Australia and the Kimberley. So the small ship companies that are planning deployments up in that region are obviously very closely engaging with the relevant state governments. Part of the work that we're doing with the federal government to understand how those ships can operate, what the conditions are to be able to bring those ships safely back into Australia. And we see with, in New South Wales, I think I heard today, have had 45 days of no community transmission.
Yeah.
So, our success in this region, in this country of keeping the virus at bay really creates the opportunity for us to be able to offer these local cruises, these local expeditions to Australians. There are so many amazing ports, destinations, regional communities who are crying out for visitors, for tourism. And those expedition ships have the ability to bring those tourists to those small communities, to spend money in the communities. Tourism Australia is saying holiday year this year. Yes. This is a great opportunity for us to be able to, be part of that tourism recovery for Australia.
No, absolutely. The other silver lining to all this, of course, is I was speaking with a major cruise operator today, and not so much for Australian cruising, but for the industry generally here. And he was telling me about 2022 and 2023, and their world cruise selling out in one day. And their forward bookings for 22 and 23 are absolutely chock-a-block. And I know it's the same for many of the cruise operators. So that must be great news for operators. But it also says the confidence that the guests have in going cruising. It's incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've got the highest market penetration for cruise in the world here in Australia. Australians love to cruise. They haven't been able to cruise for the last year. And they're chomping at the bit to get back and see. We've been doing some consumer sentiment surveys, and our surveys are showing that as many people are ready and willing to book a cruise in the that's what you could say the upcoming 2 years, as were in the period before COVID.
Wow.
And at the same time, they're also telling us that they are very cognizant of the protocols that the industry has developed in order to keep them safe, and that and most importantly, that they're willing to comply with those restrictions if it means that they can cruise again.
Yeah.
And you know, and I use the word restrictions, but it's everything that we're getting used to in our day-to-day lives.
It is. There's nothing startling about it, is there? Really, at the end of the day,
it's about checking into venues. It's about capacity restrictions, social distancing. Of course, wearing masks if you can't social distance, and then all I suppose you could say the behind-the-scenes work that the industry is doing, that the cruise lines are doing to keep people healthy on board the ships.
Yeah, I don't really want to go into the protocol side of things, but are there any indications of cruise companies now? I know that Crystal Cruises has said, I think Crystal have said they're insisting on vaccinations before cruising. Are there more companies going down that path?
I think that the cruise lines are really working with the health authorities in the different parts of the world where they operate to understand what the implications of the vaccination rollout are. We know some parts of the world are much more advanced than others, and we've always spoken about a multi-layered approach to COVID, and you know, I think everybody would probably agree that there is definitely going to be a role for the vaccine in that multi-layered approach, but it is very much going to depend on the guidance of the health authorities in each area where the ships are operating.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Joel, look, thank you very much indeed. I mean, just one more question while it comes to mind. So here we are now, March 17th. We've got a delay or an extension till June 17th. How confident do you think the domestic cruise companies might be to start their sort of serious preparations in terms of, because it takes a couple of months to get a ship down here and start operating. And I mean, they're not going to get a ship leave the Philippines or Singapore or whatever unless they know it's going to actually be operating down here, are they?
That's right, and you know, that's part of our conversations with the government is also about the lead times.
Yeah.
And you know, working backwards and what you know, what do the cruise lines need to know, both in terms of their approvals to operate, but in terms of also the broader border restrictions, in terms of the broader quarantine aspects, so that they can plan accordingly and be ready to deploy those ships at the earliest opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all looking forward to the announcements on June the 17th. We'll be headed from...
If not sooner.
If not sooner, yes, absolutely. But we're heading now from summer towards winter, so that's okay. But definitely, and congratulations to you and your colleagues in the cruise industry. It's been a long time coming, but you know, we're heading in the right direction now, as they say. And thank you for your time today, and we look forward to hearing some really good news.
Thank you, John.